Hello and welcome to a tactical history of Liverpool. For the first time in their 73-year history, Liverpool were the holders of the FA Cup. Upon the team's return to the city, they were welcomed back by hundreds of thousands of supporters lining the streets to see the trophy. There was little time for celebration, however, as just 3 days after the final they were due to host Inter Milan in the first leg of their European Cup semi-final. There was barely even enough time for Chris Lawler to get married the day before the match.
Well, on the Monday, I went training in the morning. I got married in the afternoon, and I went to my reception, cut the cake. Then I had to go away. The older lads were in Blackpool because it's a big important game the next day, So I missed my wedding night there, People weeks later said, "Oh, we had a fantastic time at your wedding," and I paid for everything, and I wasn't even there,
This was to be the first of the great European nights at Anfield.
To take on the might of Inter Milan was the night of nights, and I know there's been great nights at Anfield, but I think people of our generation would look back on it and say that was the night. That was when we really come of age and the club come of age.
I think that the greatest night at Anfield was when we'd won the cup on the Saturday, and on the Monday night we played the great Internazionale of Milan, and I've never known such an atmosphere.
We have recently done a detailed video analysing Helenio Herrera's Inter that I will link in the description, but this was La Grande Inter at its peak. They were the reigning world and European champions, and about to be named Italian champions too. Anticipation for the match was so high that Anfield was full hours before kick-off.
Our ground was full at 5:30. You could not get in. When our bus came in, there was just nobody outside of the stadium. They were all inside.
And Shankly had a plan to harness it. I asked Milan to go out early, he said, but they kept hanging around the dressing room. Eventually they made a move and went out onto the pitch. That's just what I wanted, psychologically, because I then sent out Gordon and Jerry with the FA Cup, followed by the team. Gordon Milne was still ruled out by injury, while Jerry Byrne was in no fit state to play either, having played pretty much all of the FA Cup final with a broken collarbone. Byrne said that the match itself wasn't the worst part, but rather walking up the steps of Wembley to collect the trophy. The supporters unaware of his injury kept patting him on the back in congratulations. Unfit to play, Milne and Byrne still played their part against Inter as they were sent out prior to the match to parade the FA Cup.
I've never played at Liverpool in an atmosphere like it, because Inter Milan then were probably the best team in Europe. But Shankly had this idea to actually send out Jerry Byrne, who was, arm in a sling, and Gordon Milne, who was injured for the final, to take the FA Cup round. So the crowd were whipped up into a frenzy before the match started.
Inter first heard the roar of a full-to-bursting Kop, then were hit by another wall of noise when the cup was brought out. Liverpool would go on to beat Inter, taking a 3-1 lead into the second leg. It took just 4 minutes for Liverpool to take the lead. The ball was spread wide to Ian Callaghan, who backed up Giacinto Facchetti with his dribbling, then crossed to Roger Hunt stood on the penalty spot, finishing past Giuliano Sarti. Inter would equalise a few minutes later when Ron Yates took a poor touch at an Inter clearance, allowing Joaquin Pero to rob him of the ball and square it to Sandro Mazzola to finish.
I was possibly a little bit stupid in diving in to a tackle in the halfway line where I thought I could get it. I didn't get it. The fella ran through and put it in the net.
Liverpool would soon retake the lead with a cleverly worked free kick though, Callaghan getting the finishing touch.
From my own personal point of view, I scored a very rare goal. It was a free kick, which we tried on numerous occasions in the league, which didn't come off. And big occasion and everything else, and it worked to a T.
Chris Lawler would also score, having joined the attack and cut inside onto his left foot to finish, but the goal was disallowed for offside due to Jeff Strong being judged to be interfering with play. Liverpool would get their third goal in the 75th minute though, catching out Inter on the counter-attack. They won the ball back in their own box, found Tommy Smith in midfield, and the young Scouser played in Hunt. Sarti saved Hunt's shot, but the loose ball fell to Ian St John to tap in. Liverpool had gone up against the best team on the planet and beaten them convincingly.
And the famous Herrera, who was a boxer fix, of course, he admitted to me, he said, "We've been beaten," he said, "but never defeated. Tonight we were defeated."
The sole blot on the night was the suicide of club secretary and former player Jimmy McInnes, whose body was found by one of the turnstiles. Why exactly McInnes chose to take his own life isn't known, but Shankly blamed his heavy workload. The Scot had become club secretary in the second division, where demand for tickets was much lower, but Liverpool's rapid rise through the divisions to the top of the game ensured a lot more was asked of him, and he wasn't given the necessary support to meet this increased demand. Prior to the FA Cup final, McInnes had supposedly taken to sleeping in his office at Anfield, surrounded by sacks of letters with a telephone endlessly droning as people called in hope of a ticket. Still the most popular man at Anfield, Shankly said. No, McInnes replied. Still the most unpopular man at Anfield. McInnes' role would be filled by Peter Robinson, whose good relationship with Shankly helped to diffuse tensions the manager had with the board, acting as a go-between the two conflicting camps. Things wouldn't go quite so swimmingly in the return leg, though. The problem started even before the match. Liverpool initially stayed at a hotel near Lake Como, but the bells from one of the nearby churches kept the team up through the night. Shankly went to see the Monsignor about putting a stop to them, but the bells had been ringing for hundreds of years. To Bob Paisley's great amusement, Shankly asked whether he would be allowed to wrap the bells in bandages and wool to dull the noise, but this request was denied too. Liverpool instead moved into a hotel in Milan, but this wasn't any better. As many other teams had suffered when facing Inter, Liverpool found that the local supporters weren't too welcoming, keeping them up through the night with the noise. Much as Inter had appeared wowed by the noise of Anfield, Liverpool were rattled by the hostile atmosphere of the Inter supporters on the night too.
Travelling to the match on the day, we were getting things thrown at us in the coach. And when we got to the ground, we got there quite early. Bill said, go and have a look at the pitch. I think it was the worst thing he ever done. Because when we went out, we got some reception. I remember big rockets landing just behind me, you know.
There is also the much bigger elephant in the room, though. After the victory at Anfield, Italian journalists warned Shankly that even if Liverpool outplayed Inter a second time, they would never be allowed to win. Not that they simply wouldn't win, but that they wouldn't be allowed to. Within 10 minutes, Inter had gone 2 goals up through dubious refereeing decisions, cancelling out all of Liverpool's work from the first leg.
And it was an awful feeling. And of course, the decisions on the pitch were weird. First goal was an indirect free kick, which Corser chipped into the net. They gave goal for it. Tommy Lawrence was going to bounce the ball, and as he bounced it, the fella kicked it into the net. It was the decisions.
To this day, we all believe that the referee was bent.
The referee was bent. You know, and if he wants to take me to court, if he's still alive, well, he can do, because he was bent.
Of all the people that I've seen and met, that's the one man that he haunts me to this day.
These decisions were suspect, but not necessarily proof of any wrongdoing. Mario Corso's free kick could have simply been Liverpool misinterpreting the referee José María Ortiz de Mendibil's signal, whereas the second wasn't explicitly against the rules. Today, stopping a goalkeeper from releasing the ball is outlawed by Law 12, but in 1965 it was a grey area. As George Best's famously disallowed goal against England shows, typically referees would blow up if you went anywhere near the goalkeeper, yet it wasn't expressly forbidden in the rules of the game. Discussion of the match's refereeing tends to focus on these 2 debatable decisions at the start of the game. However, far more suspicious was that basically any time the ball got anywhere near the Inter goal, Ortiz would whistle for a dubious or often non-existent foul. The goals were decisions that could be easily explained away, but it was a clear pattern to the rest of the game that can't be dismissed as just being on the wrong end of a 50-50 ruling. Right from the off, Liverpool would cry fix, but it wasn't until 1983 that their claims were given more support. Again, this was covered in our video on Inter, so check it out if you want more detail, but Juventus secretary Italio Elodio and his fixer Dejo Solti were found to have offered the referee $5,000 and a car to ensure their progress past Derby County in the 1973 European Cup. Elodie and by extension Solti had worked for Inter during the 60s, and there were numerous allegations that they had fixed European Cup semi-finals against Borussia Dortmund in 1964, Real Madrid in 1966, and, most pertinently to us, Liverpool in 1965. Nothing was ever proven, but the allegations were never really looked into either, with it suiting authorities to cover their ears and look away. We can't say that this match was fixed for sure, but it frankly more than likely was. Even if Liverpool were essentially asked to play with their shoelaces tied together, they did face other issues. They kept with the same 11 that beat Inter at Anfield, set up in a 4-2-4 formation, with Milne and Burnout injured, Jeff Strong and Ronnie Moran were the only changes from Liverpool's strongest 11. Inter made just one change to the side that lost the first leg, with Gianfranco Bedin replacing the more limited Carlo Tanyin at the base of the midfield. Tanyin had been struggling to get playing time as the younger Bedin broke into the first team, and would leave for his hometown club Alessandria at the end of the season. Liverpool went 2 goals behind very quickly and reacted poorly to it, often standing around sulking rather than getting back into position. Tommy Smith in particular was clearly wound up and hit some players with hard tackles, which may have helped to relieve some of his frustration, but only gave the referee even more reason to punish Liverpool. They were obviously smarting with a perceived injustice of the situation, and given what we know, they were probably right to be. However, it didn't help them to actually get back into the game. They also weren't helping themselves in possession. Liverpool were regularly playing aerial balls forward rather than playing into feet. These aerial balls invited 50-50 challenges, which would only give Ortiz another excuse to give a foul to Inter. It speaks to the ridiculousness of the game that Liverpool's strategy against the best team on the planet should have been adapted just to get around a clearly corrupt referee, but that was the game they had to play, and they were instead making it easy for the man in black to play the fool.
We showed our inexperience. I think later on in the game they got possession and they could. And at that time we weren't a team that could keep possession like Liverpool teams afterwards. So I think Liverpool learned in Europe that possession of the ball was what you had to do, to win European games, and that's the way Liverpool was still playing. And I think those early days we were a bit inexperienced, even though we were a good side. We didn't play this possession football that Liverpool played when they were successful in Europe.
Strong in midfield was being particularly wasteful too. He kept overhitting his passes and would shoot from distance near goal, handing the ball back to Inter. After going level on aggregate, Inter would get back quickly to defend in numbers too. This meant that none of Liverpool's attackers really had any space to make use of, slowing down their attacks. Even today, teams struggle to break down compact defences, so imagine the difficulty in doing so in 1965, when this sort of defensive strategy was new. As well as defending well, Inter also posed problems for Liverpool in attack. With Luis Suarez, Corso and Bedin in midfield, they outnumbered Liverpool in the middle, while Sandro Mazzola would regularly drop off into midfield, pulling a centre-back forward. Herrera would also pull out to the left flank, meaning Inter were playing without any real number 9 leading the line. Liverpool would typically dominate when they were able to have control of the midfield, but as we saw in episode 3 against Manchester United, if they got outnumbered in this area, things could easily unravel. With 3 men against Liverpool's 2, Inter found themselves able to cut through Liverpool, while the movement of their forwards pulling apart the Liverpool back line would create gaps for their teammates to exploit. Liverpool did gain more control by calming down a little and aimed to manipulate Inter's man marking by having Callahan switch over to the left flank, while Peter Thompson either went right, dropped deep, or came inside into the centre. They were still having problems breaking Inter's packed defence down though, while the Italians would sprint forward at speed on the counter-attack. 15 minutes into the second half, Inter got the goal that took them ahead on aggregate. And like the first 2 goals, there was no doubt about this one. Armando Piqui played into Mazzola dropping off into space. Smith was drawn out to meet him, leaving Corso free, who quickly flicked the ball onto Facchetti to finish. Liverpool's outnumbered midfield simply couldn't deal with Inter's setup and it left the defence exposed. There was to be no reply, and so Liverpool would not be champions of Europe at their first attempt. However, the psychologist Shankly remained positive though, telling his players, "Alright, we've lost, but see what you have done. Inter Milan are the unofficial champions of the world, and all these people are going mad because they are so pleased that they have beaten Liverpool. That's the standard you have raised yourselves up to." Liverpool's first foray into Europe might have ended in disappointment, but it gave the club several important lessons that would stand them in good stead in the years to come. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to support the channel. You can get updates on what I'm doing by following on Twitter and Facebook, links are in the description, but most importantly by supporting Holding Midfield on Patreon. Without financial support, I can't justify the time it goes into making these videos, so we keep the channel alive while also receiving access to premium content. Thanks for watching.